Hi everybody, this is Professor Alex, and today I am making this video to go over some of the directions, details, and expectations for your interview submissions that will be submitted within your final project, which is your journal project. And so for the journal project, when you submit that as your final, I expect there to be two interview submissions. So I made a little slideshow to cover some details, and I will be posting the slideshow in the modules along with this video so you can have access to that as well. So to start off with, let's talk about the interview project. So again, you will have access to these slides so that you can recap these and have this information as well. So first of all, in terms of the directions, you need to do two interviews, and for each one, you should be focused on a different topic that we talked about in class. You ideally should choose somebody who might have a different perspective than you, or someone who just has like a different background than you in terms of demographics or experiences. You need to create three clear questions. You really don't need to do more than three. I would highly suggest keeping this interview under 10 minutes because the longer your interview, the longer it's going to take to transcribe. So I'd be aiming to keep your interview under 10 minutes for sure. You want to make sure that you receive informed consent, and I want you to also keep interview biases in mind in terms of what biases the interviewer, you, might have, as well as what biases the interviewee or your participant may have as well. You do need to record the interview, not a video, but just audio on your phone. I don't need you to submit that. This is for you, so that when you go to transcribe it, you can transcribe in as much detail and accuracy as possible. You'll then need to code your interview. I'm looking for two or three codes, and then you will need to do a two-page reflection on that interview. So these are going to be probably the most difficult, time-consuming, and detailed submissions that you will have in your journal. So I do expect these to be high quality. In terms of your two-page reflection on the interview, there are some questions that I have written down both in the syllabus towards the end as well as within Canvas. When you click on the final, submission assignment, you'll have some questions that I provided that I want you to address within your two-page reflection. And I think those questions are largely like, what did you learn? Where did you differ? Where did you, find that you might have some similarities? And also, I want you to reflect on certain biases and if those showed up, if they didn't. But again, go and review those questions in terms of kind of what to write for your reflection. So today, what I want to talk about is structured versus semi-structured interviews, informed consent, developing clear questions, interview biases, transcriptions, and coding. To start off with structured versus semi-structured interviews, structured interview is when you have your questions and that's all you ask. Let's say you have question 1, 2, and 3. That would be all that you would say is question 1, 2, and 3 as they are written. What I want you to do is a semi-structured interview. Essentially, that means that you will be asking the questions that are written, but you're allowed to ask follow-up questions based on what your interviewee said, right? So ask your question as it's written, but then if they say something interesting, you can kind of ask a follow-up question. And that's what I want you to do. So that would be a semi-structured interview where you can kind of go off script a little bit. In terms of informed consent, we really want to make sure that we're paying attention to the ASA, APA overall code of ethics when it comes to research. This includes, maintaining objectivity and integrity within your research, respecting the subject's rights and privacy, protecting the subject from personal harm, preserving confidentiality, seeking informed consent, acknowledging any sort of like assistance. That would be maybe if someone's like funding your interview or research, as well as disclosing kind of, other sources of support. These last two aren't really relevant to you all, but focus on the first five. I'm trying to click the next button and it's not working. Oh, okay, awesome. All right, so informed consent. You need this for every interview, whether that is a survey, an interview, a questionnaire. If you're doing any sort of research, your participants need informed consent. And essentially what that means is receiving consent from your interviewee based on them being aware of what's going on, right? So this is, you're to start with informing participants of what you're doing and why. So, hey, I'm looking to do this interview on X topic. This will be done for my sociology class as an assignment. And whatever, I'm turning this in for school. So again, just letting them know like I'm doing an interview for school for a class assignment for a sociology course. That's what we're doing, right? Also informing the participant that they can stop at any time. This is important for any sort of study, letting people know if you are uncomfortable or you don't feel like answering any questions, or if you want to stop at any point, you can do that without reparation, without any sort of consequences, right? So letting them know that if there's anything that makes them uncomfortable, they don't need to do that and that they have the right to end the interview at any point. You also want to collect demographic data. Like I would like to see age, race, gender, maybe like where they live, whatever, education level. The more data you can collect, the better, but aim to at least get, name, age, and a couple other background demographics. But again, if they don't feel comfortable sharing any of that information, they don't have to, and you need to let them know that. Another big thing is letting them know that you will be recording this and that you will be submitting it for your teacher to read. So they should be informed that someone else is going to read this and that they are going to be recorded. You can't just record someone without consent. And based on, them knowing that someone else is going to read this, allow them or inform them that they can use an alias if they want, right? Like, do you want this to be anonymous? Of course, I'm not going to know who that person is personally, but it's still good practice to say, do you want to be anonymous? I want to respect your confidentiality. Do you want me to use an alias? And again, if any of this information you don't feel like sharing, that's okay. And then number four, oh, I said this, like intro that you know that you're recording and that it will be submitted and I will be reading it, right? And then if it's like a sensitive topic, provide any needed trigger warnings. Like we will be talking about X, trigger warning, or if you don't feel like comfortable talking about that, we don't have to do this, but kind of giving them a little bit of, information on what to expect if there's any sort of like sensitive questions you'll be asking or any like sensitive material that you'll be covering. So I do want to hear all of this essentially within your recording. Maybe the first question you ask is, you just tell them I'm doing an interview for a class. Can I interview you? Yes, awesome. Okay, I'm going to be recording this. Is that okay with you? Yes, awesome. Okay, cool. And then start recording and then again, provide informed consent. This will be an interview I'm doing for a class for a sociology course. The topic is X. I'll be asking you 3 questions. You are allowed to, end the interview at any point if you are uncomfortable. You don't have to answer any questions you don't want to answer. And with that, do I have your permission? And I want to see that they said yes. And then you would kind of go into the demographic data. I'm looking to collect some demographic data. I want to ask about XYZ. Do you feel comfortable sharing this information? Hopefully they say yes. And then also be like, my professor will be reading this and I want to preserve and respect your confidentiality. So would you like this to be anonymous? Would you like me to use an alias and not report your name and get that information, right? So I do, the informed consent should be part of your interview and I want to see that you did that. When it comes to questions, again, I would just aim for 3 because again, it's be semi-structured so you can ask follow-up questions based on their responses. But when you're creating questions, you want to make sure you want to start with knowing what you're looking for sort of to some degree, right? You don't want to ask questions that push participants to, answer in a particular way. But let's say you want to be clear about what you want to learn about, right? And so maybe you're really curious about, I don't know, gender discrimination at work or in school, right? And so if you want to learn about that, make sure that all of your questions are clearly about that and will give you information about whatever your topic is. Essentially, just make sure that your questions are relevant, right, and align with your goal. You want to make sure that your questions are clear, concise, focused, and relevant. And this is important because we want to avoid double-barreled questions as well as leading questions. A double-barreled question, almost like a run-on sentence, you can think of it essentially asking 2 questions in one. All of your questions should be clearly one question. It shouldn't be like a list of like a couple questions. You want it to be clear so when they answer, they know what they're answering to. You don't want a super long question. You don't want it to be convoluted. You don't want to be asking multiple questions because then the interviewee gets overwhelmed and doesn't even know where to start. You also want to avoid leading questions, which is asking questions in a way where you're kind of somewhat suggesting what you want them to respond, or where you're kind of suggesting your own perspective and therefore they might want to align with that. But any sort of questions that kind of force or push them into a certain direction, where maybe, for example, you're like, well, don't you think that women are discriminated against more? Now you're telling them that that's your perspective and that that's what you're kind of looking for. Like, and then they kind of feel pushed to be like, oh, well, yeah, women are discriminated against more. You'd want to more so ask, do you believe that women or men are discriminated against more in the workplace? And that's open and that's not pushing your perspective or not stating a clear perspective. So again, more so being like, do you believe that women or men are discriminated against more in the workplace versus being like, don't you believe or do you believe that women are discriminated against more in the workplace? So make sure that your questions aren't leading and that, this is important so that you can get their true, honest, genuine answer without, you'll see that there are certain biases, such as social desirability biases, where interviewees like to look good in interviews and questionnaires and will answer in a way that, they think that you want them to answer or in a way that they think makes them look good. So avoid that. You also want to ensure the question is open-ended. By that, I mean they should be able to elaborate. It shouldn't just be like a yes or no question. It should be something that allows them to kind of go into more detail. And then I would also say to kind of plan or consider any follow-up questions before the interview, in case there's any like follow-up questions that you want, that you want to ask based on their answers. But again, making sure that you really only have three main questions, but are preparing for a possibility to ask follow-up questions. In terms of biases, I want you definitely to pay attention to these, make sure that you're not making these mistakes, but then also kind of in your write-up and your reflection of the interview, kind of reflect on these things. And, it's okay if some of these things happen, but at least be able to name that and recognize that, right? So first of all, as the interviewer, you want to make sure that you're not stereotyping or making any assumptions about your interviewee, which is hard because you're probably going to know that person personally. So you do want to kind of approach the interview where you're not making assumptions about their answers based on what you know about them. Try to be as unbiased as possible. There's also the halo effect, which is allowing your own personal view to overshadow information collected. So kind of analyzing it in a way that comes from your perspective rather than respecting and trying to analyze their answers in a more objective way. There's also confirmation bias, and this kind of goes back to leading questions in terms of asking questions that confirm what you already know. We want to make sure that we're doing the opposite of that. We don't want to push them in a direction to answer what you already believe to be true. We want to give them an opportunity to answer the questions in a genuine manner about what they actually believe, whether that aligns with your beliefs or not. We already talked about leading questions, right? By asking questions that suggest a desired answer or that might influence the respondent to provide a particular response or, a particular perspective or whatever. There's also question order bias. And this is when like the way that you order the questions might influence the participant. So you want to be aware of that as well in terms of your first question being more open-ended. Really what I would suggest is like your questions starting more wide and broad and then getting more narrow as you go or more specific as you go, rather than starting with a specific question that kind of triggers them in a way where they know what you're looking for, right? So just think about the order of your questions and why you want to order them that way. Just be thoughtful about that. And that would be something good to reflect upon within the reflection as well, in terms of telling me, why did you choose the order of your questions and put them in that order? Why did you word the question in the way that you did? Those are all interesting things that you should consider and that you should reflect on. There's also, of course, interviewee biases or participant biases. As I kind of mentioned, social desirability bias is a really big one. This is when the interviewee or your participant answer questions in a way that they think might make them look good. And again, this could be something that they think makes them look good or something that they think would make you like them. So again, this might be them kind of aligning their answers with what they think that you want to hear. Or this could just be, again, not wanting to look bad. So answering the question in a way that makes them look more socially acceptable rather than being honest. And that's why you want to pay attention to how you're wording your questions so that we can kind of avoid this, hopefully. We also have demand characteristics. So this is when the individuals kind of sense what the researcher is looking for and they kind of go along with that and might adjust their questions in a way that, again, is impacted by kind of knowing what your goal is and then aligning their questions to that. And that's where kind of the order of the questions is important to kind of try to avoid demand characteristics. We also have performance bias, which is similar to social desirability bias, but essentially this is when the it's kind of like a mix of social desirability bias and demand characteristics. But when the participant focuses more on, again, providing the desired outcome or answers that align with your goals and your perspective, and they're more worried about being correct, or even like politically correct or socially desirable rather than answering in a genuine manner that reflects them. So again, make sure that you make sure your interviewee is comfortable so that they don't feel like they need to perform well. It's not something that they need to perform well on. It's something where we're just curious about their perspective. Make sure that you make that clear. Then there's acquiescence bias, which is agreeing with everything, just, agreeing with whatever you're saying and going along that line, saying yes to everything. And then again, question order bias, when the order impacts their answer. I think I meant to delete this and keep it on the other slide, so ignore that. But there's also recall bias, which is when people might forget or misremember information. And just as an interviewer, you want to be aware of that. If you're asking them questions about something that happened 10 years ago, their answer might not be entirely accurate, or they might be misremembering some details. In terms of transcribing, again, you need to record the interview on your phone as an audio file, whatever, voice memo. And transcribing is quite literally writing down your interview to a T. The goal is that if, for example, I go to read your transcription of your interview, I want to almost feel like I'm there, like I kind of understand the nuances of this participant. So this includes writing down every word as they say it. Do not paraphrase. Write the question as they say it. Even if they stutter, include that. If they have pauses, include that. If they laugh, include that. If they roll their eyes, include that. All of these things, whether verbal or nonverbal, I want these cues written down. So sometimes interviewers will do like 2 dots means a 2-second pause, 3 dots means a 3-second pause, 4 dots means a 4-second pause. If someone laughs, you want to put that in, parentheses. If someone feels like looks very hesitant or they're really thinking about the question, you can note that as well. But essentially, really noting anything that's important, whether verbal or nonverbal. And again, writing things exactly as the participant or the interviewee said it, even if they're saying things like or so or well, all of those things should be noted. This does take some time. This is tedious, and that's why I suggest your interview staying under 10 minutes because this will take a little bit of effort. And I just want, it is tedious, but I want you all to understand the process of doing interviews and all the things that interviewers need to pay attention to when they're doing qualitative research. In terms of coding, think of coding as color coding. That's literally what it is. You're color coding your interview in terms of themes that you found. I'm looking for 2 or 3 themes. Even 2 is fine because I know some of these interviews might be short, but this is after you kind of go back and read your transcription and reflect on what themes that you hear. And so then what you'll want to do is choose a color for each theme and go into your interview and highlight the themes based on the color that you chose. So, this could be positive attitude versus negative attitude. This could be, it's really hard for me to give you some because it's so going to depend and be specific to your interview. But this could be like, I don't know. We can talk about more examples in class for sure. But again, looking at themes and this could be like themes of discrimination. This could be positive experiences, negative experiences, confusion. This could be feelings. This could be words. This could be really anything, but you have to find the themes within your interview. And you also need to make sure that you provide a key so that I know what you're talking about. So if you are using the color purple and green to code your interview, make sure I know what purple means and what green means. Otherwise, I'm not going to know what your themes are, right? So make sure that you state, green highlight is this theme and purple highlight is this theme. And make sure that's kind of at the top. So as I'm reading your interview, I know what themes you're talking about. Otherwise, I'll be confused. So here's some examples, and these aren't the best examples, but it would look something like this in terms of whatever. These aren't like the best codes or they're not super relevant to our class, but let's just say like willfulness or scrutiny or perspective on harm or, support or not support or whatever. And you'll, again, make very clear to me what each color means, and then you'll go in and highlight your interview based on the codes that you came up with. I would start by reviewing your interview, pulling out some common themes, and then creating the codes, and then going to find the excerpts that fit the codes within your interview. This is a kind of a better example in terms of what I want it to look like with you all. But this should be like you, the interviewer, your question, and then your interviewee or participant. And so see how they came up with these codes down here. So red was reason for admission, yellow was referral to the ICU, green was, I don't know why green's in purple, but green is patient's perception of the staff. They had turquoise as was the procedure painful. Blue is treatment plan, pink is patient expressing anxieties. So this is more so what I'm looking for in terms of your submission. But again, I would rather you have this coding kind of like up front. If it's at the end, that's fine too. Just make sure that it's clear to me what your codes are. And then again, you'll go in and kind of take parts of the interview that align with your themes and your codes and make sure that you essentially color code your interview. So that part shouldn't be that hard. You only have to pick 2 or 3 codes, keep it simple, and I think that y'all will do a great job. So again, there's a lot of details here to kind of make sure that you're paying attention to, especially within, when you're creating your questions, your question order, and when you're doing a reflection, you might notice, wow, well, you might have done your best job to make sure there's no leading questions, no double-barrel questions, no biases on your end. But you might still do the interview and reflect and be like, wow, I definitely see social desirability bias here because it seems like they were trying to answer in a way that made them look good or in a way that might impress me or in a way that might align with the perspective that they know that I have. So again, you can't control these for the most part, but make sure that you reflect on them and you notice them and you're paying attention. But okay, just make sure that you kind of review this. If you go onto YouTube and YouTube like transcription process or coding process, there will be more detail there if you want more information from another perspective. But for my class, just keep it simple, keep it straightforward, keep it clean, and you'll be totally fine. But overall, just make sure that you're following along with this and these instructions, and you'll do perfectly well. So don't stress about it. Just make sure that you are paying attention to detail. That's kind of the biggest thing. But you can't control your participants. You can't control what they answer. You can only control how you develop your questions in your interview and making sure that you're doing that in the most ethical way possible or in a way that really allows them the opportunity to be honest and genuine, where you're not pushing them one way or another and you're not making your biases or perspective clear, right? So whatever, make sure that you kind of review the information. You should be getting started on these probably this weekend because you do need 2 of them and they do take some time. So make sure you think about that, get started. And, after you do one, if you want to check in with me, show me what you have. I can tell you if you're on the right track or if there's anything that you need to kind of add or edit. I'm here to help you and support you. I know that this is probably new to a lot of you, but honestly, just have fun with it and you'll be fine. But otherwise, I hope that you all enjoy the rest of your morning, afternoon, night, and I'm looking forward to seeing you all in class tomorrow. And we can talk more about this after you kind of review these instructions. And again, you can always email me with any questions. I'm here to help. Otherwise, Professor Alex signing off.